The Rolling Stones did not simply make records. They made statements, loud, abrasive, and often reckless, statements that either seduced or enraged the world. Theirs was not the polished rebellion of the Beatles, nor the sunshine harmony of the Beach Boys. This was raw, jagged, and volatile rock and roll, made by a group that thrived on friction both inside and outside the studio. And nothing proved it more than their most controversial albums. In the mid-1960s, the Stones had established themselves as the dangerous alternative to polite pop culture. But after Aftermath and Between the Buttons, the cultural explosion of 1967 forced them into unfamiliar territory. Psychedelia had taken over. The Beatles had Sgt. Pepper. The Stones responded with Their Satanic Majesty's Request, an album born from chaos. The sessions were a mess. Keith Richards was spiraling deeper into heavy drug use. Brian Jones, once the band's instrumental genius, was distant and unpredictable. Mick Jagger was distracted by celebrity and scandal, including his highly publicized relationship with Marianne Faithfull. Recording dragged on for months. Engineers came and went. The band members barely showed up at the same time. When the album finally emerged, the critics were brutal. They called it a confused, self-indulgent copy of the Beatles' psychedelic masterpiece. But behind the scenes, the album represented something more dangerous: the growing fracture in the Stones' unity. Brian Jones' role diminished sharply. Keith Richards began to assert more musical control, and the rest of the band started to question whether their sound should follow trends or defy them entirely. 2 years later, the tensions exploded in a darker way. Beggar's Banquet marked a return to their blues roots, but its release was delayed for months over the infamous toilet cover controversy. Their record label refused to print the artwork, a filthy bathroom wall covered in graffiti, calling it obscene. Jagger and Richards refused to back down. The battle dragged on, keeping the album out of stores while the band's finances took a hit. Then came Let It Bleed, an album soaked in death, drugs, and political unrest. The Altamont Free Concert in December 1969, organized in part to promote the album, ended in chaos when a fan was killed by the Hells Angels, who had been hired as security. The violence overshadowed the music entirely, cementing the Stones as the most dangerous band alive. The press called them reckless, even murderous. But the real internal war came with Exile on Main Street in 1972. Recorded while the band was in tax exile in France, the sessions were a nightmare. Keith Richards was living in a mansion in Villefranche-sur-Mer, using heroin heavily, disappearing for days and sometimes refusing to play at all. Mick Jagger, increasingly focused on fame and fashion, clashed with Richards over creative control. The rest of the band worked in claustrophobic basement rooms, often recording without knowing if Keith or Mick would even show up. Despite the chaos, Exile became one of their most celebrated albums. But at the time, it was seen as bloated and incoherent. Jagger himself was lukewarm about it. The critical reappraisal came decades later, but the sessions left scars that never fully healed. The late 1970s brought another firestorm with Some Girls. Musically sharp and aggressive, the album revitalized the band, but also courted controversy with its lyrics. Jagger's provocative lines were accused of being sexist and racist. Civil rights groups called for boycotts. Some radio stations refused to play certain tracks. Richards, newly sober after narrowly avoiding a years-long prison sentence in Canada for heroin possession, stood by the record's rawness, while Jagger defended it as satire. The public outrage only fueled its sales, making it one of their biggest commercial successes. But success did not equal peace. The 1980s were defined by deep fractures. During Tattoo You, Much of the material came from leftovers and unfinished tracks from earlier years, because Jagger and Richards could barely work together in the same room. By Dirty Work in 1986, the hostility was open warfare. Richards accused Jagger of abandoning the band to pursue his solo career. Jagger accused Richards of dragging the Stones into the past. The result was an album soaked in bitterness, with lyrics and performances that barely masked the contempt. Even Charlie Watts, usually the quiet mediator, was fed up. Throughout it all, the Stones seemed to feed off the chaos. Every controversy, whether over an album cover, a lyric, or a disastrous concert, only deepened their legend. But it also came at a cost. Band members burned out, relationships broke apart, and the shadow of Brian Jones' 1969 death never truly left them.
Looking back, each of these albums is more than just a collection of songs. They are battlefields. Their Satanic Majesty's Request marked the moment the band almost lost its identity. Beggar's Banquet and Let It Bleed showed how defiance could fuel greatness and tragedy. Exile on Main Street revealed the toll of artistic obsession under the weight of addiction. Some girls proved they could weaponize outrage for success, and Dirty Work exposed just how close the world came to losing the Rolling Stones entirely. The Rolling Stones survived not because they avoided conflict, but because they embraced it, twisted it into something unforgettable. Their most controversial albums didn't just push boundaries, they bulldozed them. And in doing so, they wrote the most dangerous chapters in rock history.